Hello, I'm Andrew Pritchard, and thank you for watching today's Corn Belt Regional Forecast, brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. Karen Braun, a global ag columnist at Thomson Reuters, she's also a meteorologist by training, shared these photos on Twitter, these Crop Watch 19 photos. I picked Kansas and Illinois here, but the images are similar with surrounding states here, just showing the growth stage of the corn crops here from 2018 to 2019 in the third week of June, and just drastic differences. And the Kansas story is told well with that image in particular, with standing water surrounding those crops. Seeing a lot of that, unfortunately, across the Corn Belt. Checking in with corn conditions and soybean conditions on the left, we're looking at the change in the corn crop conditions here from June 16th through the 23rd, seeing a decline in conditions across some of our highest producing states in the Corn Belt. And on the right side, we're looking at soybean conditions. The change from June 23rd, looking at the comparison to the 5-year average here. In Nebraska, the only state here that hits average, everywhere else almost uniformly significantly below the 5-year average here for soybean crop conditions. And that is largely a result of this stubborn pattern that will not break, keeping things cool and wet across the Corn Belt. While we will see a reprieve here that we'll talk about, it's not a total shutdown here, and so it's just something we're going to have to continue to monitor as we go through the rest of this summer. The last 72 hours of precipitation, the last 3 days here really have hit this area hard. Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, Arkansas, into parts of the lower and middle Mississippi River Valley, into the Ohio River Valley, with these squall lines, these heavy rain producing clusters of thunderstorms. But over the last 2 weeks, it's been this boundary here, this corridor that was well advertised by the models. They did get this right, from the Central Plains into the eastern Corn Belt and then surrounding areas there across the middle Mississippi Valley into the lower Mississippi Valley, with just repeated rounds of very heavy rainfall. And if we, some images were shared on Twitter here. I pulled Corey Ritter's image from Blue Mound, Illinois, and drew an arrow to that location here in central Illinois. And this was after one of these clusters of thunderstorms dropped several inches of rain over just a couple-hour period. And what was a corn and a soybean crop now resembling lakefront property. These storms also were prolific wind damage producers. We saw corridors of high winds and wind damage across the central United States each and every day over the last week or so. This video came from Atlanta, Georgia, outside of the Corn Belt, but we saw a lot of this across, again, the entire Corn Belt, where these damaging wind-producing squall lines and mesoscale convective systems tracked. And we get these high winds with the saturated soils, and we've seen a lot of trees falling. We had a colleague back in the office here in Champaign, Illinois, who had multiple vehicles crushed when a large 100-year-old tree fell on their driveway. And again, this videographer, very lucky, as this tree fell directly on him, but he was able to get out of the way here just before it crashed onto the top of their house. So it's been another rough week in the weather department, but we'll go ahead and we'll look forward. Here is the wind damage reports. This is, again, kind of tells the story of what we've been dealing with over the last week. This is from June 21st. And this is when we saw a cluster of thunderstorms develop in Colorado, tracking across Kansas, parts of Missouri and Illinois, diving south through the Mid-South, Kentucky, Tennessee, parts of the Gulf Coast, before exiting off the coast of South Carolina, traveling a distance of about 1,500 miles over the course of a day and a half. These thunderstorms developed on Thursday afternoon in Colorado, traveling across the central United States before dying out Saturday morning off the coast of South Carolina. And this is just what makes this precipitation so difficult to predict in advance. When we talk about summer precipitation patterns, this is the day one severe weather outlook from June 21st, that same day where we saw this thunderstorms develop in Colorado, tracking across the central U.S. and then off the coast of South Carolina. In the morning, the Storm Prediction Center, and now this is not a slam on them, this is just displaying how difficult this is. These guys are the experts in this field at the Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma. And during the morning of the 21st, they did not even have South Carolina in a general thunderstorm outlook. And that is just because, none of the weather models had that thunderstorm cluster making it beyond really the state of Illinois. But we know in the back of our minds that these things can sometimes take on a mind of their own, and, they can ride the hot and humid air mass for hours or days in the most extreme instances. And so rather than die out in the mid-Mississippi Valley, this thing, of course, continued on, dove to the southeast, and continued to produce widespread wind damage. So it's just a perfect example of when we talk about the very hard to predict precipitation patterns here across the Midwest, across the Corn Belt, when we get into these summertime weather patterns. Now, I actually think that the National Blended Model does a pretty good job of highlighting where we're going here over the next 10 days. and that is shifting the jet stream north. When we do that, we take the best upper level support for widespread showers and thunderstorms, and we lift that north, talking about the Canadian prairies here into parts of the Great Lakes. This is where our new corridor that's going to be favored for these heavy rain producing thunderstorm clusters is going to be. We're going to shift this just north, at least for the next 7 to 10 days. South of that, though, we're going to have little perturbations within the jet stream. We're going to have the Gulf of Mexico wide open. We're going to be seeing almost daily chances for isolated thunderstorms. And at times, these can grow upscale into clusters of thunderstorms that last for, maybe several hours, producing perhaps some damaging winds. And so while this is our favored corridor now over the next 7 to 10 days, the Corn Belt here, not out of the gun. This is not a full shutdown, hot drought pattern. Absolutely not. It's going to be hotter. It's going to be drier. But each day we're going to have to watch for these chances for thunderstorms to sneak up on us across the Corn Belt as little disturbances within the jet stream kind of track through this hot, unstable air mass. And as we get little clusters of pop-up thunderstorms developing too beneath that ridge of high pressure across parts of the Corn Belt. So we'll dissect this here, but this actually displays the northward shift in the widespread precipitation well with the corridors here of clusters of thunderstorms developing across the Corn Belt through the next 7 to 10 days. Week 1, GFS ensemble precipitation anomaly also does a good job here, kind of highlighting the corridor. We can go ahead and just kind of connect that here from the Canadian prairies into the Great Lakes, showing it drier here. But remember, this is not going to pick up on these isolated thunderstorm chances. This ensemble forecast, it does not pick up on isolated areas of thunderstorms. So remember, while it shows drier here, it's not a complete shutdown. We're not shifting to a drought-like pattern here. It's going to be watching for day-by-day chances for isolated areas of thunderstorms and heavy precipitation. Once we get to week 2 now, we're looking at the first week in July. We've got very low predictability, low consistency within the weather models here, where we've got trying to figure out what the longevity is with this ridge of high pressure as we build in a ridge over the central U.S. and shift to this drier pattern across the Corn Belt. How long does that last? What does it look like when it breaks down? The long-range models, the GFS and both the European model that often is very reliable, is having a difficult time in ironing out where we go in the 7 to 10 day time frame. I'll show that as well here, a bit of the confusion. So the GFS ensemble, as it stands now, does want to kind of shift us back to at least a somewhat active pattern here across the Corn Belt as we get into the first week of July. So again, we're shifting to a drier pattern, but I just want to pump the brakes on saying that the heavy rain is done across the Corn Belt, that the cool and wet pattern is done across the Corn Belt, because right now, while it looks like we're going to see this ridge build in at least through the end of the month here, once we get into the beginning of July, a bit of a disagreement as to where we are headed. Temperatures, just briefly, we'll cover this more towards the end of the video. We are introducing some warmer temperatures as that ridge builds in here across the Corn Belt. As we look at the 5 days that follow here, this days 6 through 10 now, so getting into the first couple of days of July, keeping warmer temperatures in across the Midwest, across much of the Corn Belt, or at least near average. So we'll take a look at the radar now as we wake up on Tuesday morning, and we're seeing this area of low pressure begin to lift off to the northeast here across the Great Lakes that brought showers and storms to parts of the eastern Corn Belt. And then we're also waking up to a little area of showers and storms across the Missouri Valley here along the border of Iowa and Nebraska. And let's go ahead and zoom in here, because this is something I mentioned in one of the other videos. We've got another one of these mesoscale convective vortexes. And what this is, vortices, I should say, get my tense correct. We get clusters of thunderstorms that develop here across the plains, and they can continue on through the afternoon and evening and into part of the overnight and even into the morning here. We still have some lightning strikes here early on Tuesday morning. But then left over as these thunderstorms decay is this area of low pressure that we call an MCV, or a mesoscale convective vortex. And as this continues on to the east, here is, just so I can kind of get your bearings, this is Omaha, Des Moines, so we're looking at the Iowa and Nebraska border here. Here is Missouri off to the south. We'll take these off now. But as this continues off to the east, we'll have to watch for thunderstorms to reignite along this. We're also seeing this line here, this fine line that you see kind of appear there. That's the cold outflow, the cool rain-cooled air whooshing out ahead or carrying on even as these thunderstorms have begun to die out. And you can actually see on the bottom of this frame here how the outflow can kind of kick off a new area of showers and storms. So as this progresses off to the east, we need to watch it for the redevelopment of showers and storms across parts of eastern Iowa, across parts of northern Illinois. And again, this is another thing that we've shifted from watching these big areas of low pressure, these big troughs moving through the area, and we pivot and we have to look for these little clues each morning when we wake up, looking for what could be the catalyst for the redevelopment of showers and storms. We can see that when we look at the satellite picture here. I'll go ahead and let this play out here as we wake up, and you'll see this little swirl, this spiral within the atmosphere, and that is that mesoscale convective complex trying to track through parts of western Iowa. And again, watching for this to reignite potentially across parts of eastern Iowa into northern Illinois. The high resolution rapid refresh model does a good job here. We start this here at 6 o'clock in the morning. Here is that MCV right now tracking across parts of western Iowa. As we head through the day, this does reignite scattered storms across parts of northern Illinois. And again, we have to watch out here parts of eastern Iowa, depending on how early this flares up. But watching this corridor for the redevelopment of showers and storms as we head into the afternoon. And then we can check in with the high resolution NAM model to get a longer picture. But this is what you have to notice. Look at western Iowa and eastern Nebraska. This model does not have that MCV. So this is, again, some of the trouble when we show you these precipitation forecast models, these high resolution images, the precipitation forecast, and we say don't focus in on the details, notice the overall pattern, notice the overall trend. How can this model be believed to 100% certainty if it doesn't know what's going on right at this exact moment? We're going to play this out into the future, and if it doesn't know what's happening now, then we can't take this and just buy it as gospel. But we'll play it out. We'll show you what the trend is here, and we're going to go ahead. We'll start this. I'll click through time. We are missing that MCV here across parts of western Iowa. So again, watching for the redevelopment of some showers and storms here across parts of eastern Iowa into northern Illinois later on Tuesday afternoon and Tuesday evening. The high-resolution NAM model takes us into Tuesday evening, and along what's likely outflow from that first cluster of thunderstorms, we redevelop some showers and storms across parts of Nebraska and southern Iowa on Tuesday evening into Tuesday night. Again, these could be producing heavy rain, damaging winds. We'll then have to watch out Tuesday night into early Wednesday morning for these to continue on into parts of northern Missouri, into northern and central Illinois. We'll play this out a little bit further. We'll go into the morning hours on Wednesday, getting into Wednesday afternoon. We're seeing another cluster of thunderstorms potentially popping up here across parts of the Mid-South and the Ohio River Valley. Also watching now as another trough emerges over the western U.S. We'll be watching along the Front Range here in the high plains for thunderstorms developing across parts of the Dakotas into Nebraska and Kansas as we head into Wednesday night and Thursday early morning. And then again, we watch the same thing happens here. We get thunderstorms that develop here across the high plains. They continue to track off to the east during the overnight hours, and then perhaps waking up on Thursday morning with an area of thunderstorms producing damaging winds and heavy rain across parts of the upper Midwest here, maybe parts of Minnesota, parts of Iowa, Wisconsin, maybe northern Illinois getting in on this as well. It's just a pattern where now we have to start watching for clues each morning, watching for clues off to the west as to what could be a catalyst for the development of additional showers and thunderstorms. So here it is. We'll play out the precipitation forecast map from the high-resolution NAM model, taking us through 2 p.m. on Thursday afternoon, so taking us Tuesday through Thursday afternoon. And remembering that we're looking at the pattern here, we're going to be watching for corridors of heavy rain and corridors of thunderstorms producing perhaps some damaging winds. But we're understanding that this is not gospel. This is not 100% fact. We already know that it's missing one clue right here that could potentially produce a cluster of heavier rain or at least isolated swaths of heavier rain across parts of northern Illinois that it does not show here. This be what could happen on Thursday morning that it's showing up right here. So again, just, find yourself on the map, but don't, look over to the right and then try and guess about how much precipitation. It's just know that across this area here, at least for the next 48 hours, we'll be watching for clusters of thunderstorms to develop before we shift the greatest threat off to the north while still watching for isolated chances for showers and storms as we head through the next 7 to 10 days across the remainder of the Corn Belt. Another cool thing that we can do is we can look at this loop of atmospheric instability, a loop of CAPE here. This is the fuel for these thunderstorms. And as you play it out, each afternoon you see the rich, warm and humid air mass here showing us these very high instability values. This shows the potential for, again, explosive thunderstorm development each afternoon with these thunderstorms producing heavy rain and potentially some damaging winds. But What I really want to show you is, as we play this out, I'm going to loop it one more time. You see these swaths be eaten away and eroded. There it is. There's one. You see that continuing on. You see another one off towards the upper Midwest. Let me play it one more time for you. Here you can watch. I'll kind of draw along with it. You watch this here, and then you see it flare back up in this area. Now we're watching one off to the north. I totally missed it with that line. But that's outflow from these thunderstorm complexes. This is that cool, rain-cooled air that it's essentially like taking a bucket of water. You got a full bucket there, you dump it out on the driveway, and it hits the ground and it fans out. That's what the cold, rain-cooled air does from these thunderstorm complexes. It hits the grounds, fans out, and that can not only cool things off when that gust front moves through your area, you get a little reprieve from the warm and muggy afternoon. But that boundary there, as that cooler air begins to spread out, let me go ahead and we'll play it one more time because I do want to show you. As this spreads out, you can get additional thunderstorms develop along the leading edge. Here comes this next swath there of outflow. So just something that's kind of cool that shows up there is the impact that these clusters of thunderstorms have on the surrounding environment. The next 3 days, the severe weather outlooks from the Storm Prediction Center here, we're watching for the chance of some strong to severe storms in this corridor here from parts of Nebraska and Kansas into the Great Lakes on Tuesday. During the day on Wednesday, we shift the risk outside of the Corn Belt for the most part, a slight risk in parts of Montana, a marginal risk here across the high plains. This storm system here lifts off to the northeast, bringing a marginal risk of some strong storms to parts of northern Indiana, northern Ohio, and then parts of the northeast region. And then day 3, we continue to lift this risk off to the north, seeing the greatest risk for a strong storm across parts of the Dakotas into the upper Midwest in this general area. Take a look now at the next 10 days looped out by the National Blended Model. I already showed you the static image here showing the total accumulation, but again, this shows the pattern well. The heaviest corridor going to be off to the north now, but still watching for chances for isolated thunderstorms popping up across the remainder of the Corn Belt. It's not a full shutdown. We're not going to drought, not by any stretch of the imagination. We will have chances for thunderstorms beneath that ridge as we head through the next 7 to 10 days. Here's a look now at part of what makes this difficult. Again, we can look to the upper levels. We watch for the best upper level support, the strongest jet stream winds. This certainly lifts off to the north, but beneath this ridge, that's where we still have the chance for little clusters of thunderstorms to develop. You look here, you notice it's not a full shutdown. While we've got the heaviest precipitation off to the north, you're still seeing little clusters of thunderstorms developing here across the Corn Belt over the next 7 to 10 days. And then as we get to the very end of this loop, we'll go ahead and we'll just skip to the very end. As we get into the very beginning of July, you see we've got a broader ridge overall, but within the center of that, we've also got a smaller trough within there. So again, it's not the death ridge that we look at. We're not sending the jet stream way up into Canada with no flow across the United States. It's a subtle, or not a subtle, it is a well-defined ridge, but we've got disturbances tracking underneath that ridge that we're going to have to watch each day and continue to break down for who's going to see the chance for these clusters of thunderstorms each day. The last reason that we'll see this pattern, we're not shutting down the Gulf of Mexico. We continue to have strong flow out of the south, bringing warm and humid air up from the Gulf of Mexico. And so each one of those disturbances that not only tracks along the stronger jet stream flow across the northern U.S. and the Great Lakes, but each little subtle perturbation or mesoscale convective vortex, MCV, that tracks through the area is going to have plenty of fuel to work with to reignite into heavy rain and damaging wind-producing thunderstorms. The total precipitation map here getting us through the 1st of July from the European weather model, again showing this corridor of heavier precipitation shifting off to the north, but still seeing the chance for thunderstorms across the remainder of the Corn Belt. And then we compare the European model and the GFS side by side. Both models have the pattern pretty well nailed down, keeping the heavier swaths of precipitation across the Canadian prairies into the northern plains, the upper Midwest. And then the GFS, I think does a little bit better job kind of showing the isolated pockets of precipitation across not just the Corn Belt, but getting into the Mid-South and the Gulf Coast, where, again, we're going to continue to pump moisture in from the Gulf of Mexico. We're going to have the stronger jet stream flow off to the north, but we'll have little disturbances tracking through the area. We'll have little decaying remnants of thunderstorms from the day before tracking through beneath this ridge. And with that warm and unstable air mass, with the saturated soils, it's not going to be a full shutdown across the region. That's drier, but some people are still going to be able to squeak out some rain here over the next 7 to 10 days. I mentioned the low confidence and the inconsistency, even with our very reliable European model. And what I've done here is I've taken the forecast for the evening of July 2nd from the European model. I've taken the last 4 runs. Going back, here is the most recent right here in the lower left, going back in time. So here's the most recent, second most recent, third, and then fourth. And we see here, when we go back to the run about 2 days ago, we see a trough within the flow across the upper Midwest. And when we look at the next run, we've got a pretty strong ridge across the central United States. We go to the run from the yesterday morning, and here's a more subtle version of that trough here across the upper Midwest with some ridging over the eastern U.S. And then we go to the most recent run from last night, and we've got a well-defined trough over the western United States. We've got a ridge over the eastern U.S., but then we've also got some troughing going on here across the central U.S. Now, I will point out that each run of this model here, the European model, does have this kind of upper level low tracking through the southern United States, but how it handles this ridge, the longevity of the ridge, and how easy it is for us to break this down and bring back a cool and wet pattern here, plenty of disagreement with. And that's why when we're looking out to the first week of July, I'm kind of teasing the low consistency. I just want to make sure that, we're watching this ridge and not praising it as the savior for the growth season here, because there's not much consistency here when we look out to the first week of July, and there's still plenty of potential that we could bring back this cool and wet pattern again as we head back into the first week of July. We'll finish looking at high temperatures over the next 5 days here, and we are going to be introducing some warmth here to the Corn Belt again as we head into the next weekend. Your Tuesday high temperatures starting to bring some upper 80s and 90s into parts of the central Corn Belt. We do that a little bit better as we get to Wednesday, and now Thursday, Friday, and by the time we get to Saturday, really warming up across the middle part of the country. We've got 90s now working their way well into the Corn Belt here, with upper 90s possible across the Central Plains. As always, Eric Snodgrass will have an in-depth look at the next 1 to 2 weeks in our Thursday morning ag forecast video, and I'll have your next Corn Belt regional update for you midday on Friday. Have a great day.